Hello, everybody watching on tonight's channel. It's very nice to have everybody in. Very, very nice to have everybody here. Giving everybody a second to make their way in. Hope everybody's having a lovely morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. My name is Nick Mitchell. I'm here with Book Passage. Welcome in, welcome in. Excellent. Okay, everybody. Welcome to another Book Passage Live. We here at the bookstore are very excited to bring to you some of the best authors and conversations you can find out there on the internet. If you've seen one of these events before, then welcome back. We're happy to have you again. And if you're new here, Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And back when crowds weren't quite so dangerous, we hosted book talks just like this one at our store. As we are now streaming live on YouTube, and I think we'll probably continue to do so in the future, please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video. It doesn't cost you anything, and it honestly and truthfully does help us out. Also, if you click the little bell right next to the subscribe button and select all from the drop-down menu, you'll be alerted every time we go live or even post a pre-recorded author interview, as we do every once in a while. If you want to check out something from She Writes Press or any of the other books mentioned here tonight, you can find them at bookpassage.com. I will be sure to post the link to these speakers' books in the chat in just a minute. Finally, if you have any questions for tonight's speakers, please just write them in the YouTube chat. It's probably to the right of the screen or maybe just below it. And I'll do my best to relay those questions to them. We don't always get to all of them, but the questions and comments are always appreciated, and we do share them afterwards. Now, on to tonight's guests and creators. Allow me to introduce them from She Writes Press. First up is Linda Koss, who began her career as a magazine writer and correspondent. Her work has previously appeared in Time, the Detroit Free Press, and Columbus Monthly, more recently in Full Grown People, The MacGuffin, Jewish Literary Journal, and Kenyan Review Online. She is the author of A Richie Boy and Tassa's Song, two historical World War II novels that are both inspired by true events. A longtime civic leader in Columbus, Koss is the founding owner of Gramercy Books, an independent bookstore in Central Ohio. If you live near there or would like to look at that, please consider supporting them. Amy Peel grew up and went to nursing school in the Chicago area, where she practiced transplant nursing for 35 years. She moved to San Francisco in 1985 to follow her transplant career and retired from UCSF in 2014 as Director of Clinical Operations, where she oversaw more than 600 organ transplants annually. Amy loves to swim, teach chair yoga, meditate, and kill the people she doesn't like in the pages of her books. Not to worry, though, she's a transplant professional, so she makes sure to make good use of all their organs. Amy was recently elected to the Novato City Council, where she's discovering a new population of folks that may find their way into the pages of her books. Layla Taraf, I hope that's correct, is a senior human resource executive with more than 25 years of professional experience. After graduating with her MBA from Haas School of Business at the University of California, Berkeley, she became one of the founding team members at Walmart.com. She then served as Chief People Officer at Pete's Tea and Coffee, an iconic Bay Area premium coffee company, which was also very close to our San Francisco store, and disappoints me that they are gone. Currently, Layla serves as the Chief People Officer for Allbirds. She advises entrepreneurs and investors, and she guest lectures at Berkeley Law School. Also, she's coming to us today from our very own Larkspur, California, which makes me very happy. Our discussion tonight will be moderated by Brooke Warner, who is a publisher at She Writes Press. We are very, very lucky and quite excited to have all of them here with us today. But let me hand the show over to our speakers. Let's stop dilly-dallying around, everybody. Thank you for coming. Please welcome all of our speakers.
Thanks, Nick. Wonderful to be with all of you tonight, and I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of She Writes Press to interview and moderate this, to interview three of my authors and to moderate today's event. So thanks everybody for being with us, and I am Brooke Warner. So hello, sister authors. It's great to see the three of you. Welcome. So tonight's event is called Why She Writes. And so I thought it would be a great way to introduce your books to the audience, to talk a little bit about why you wrote this particular book. And I will note that Amy and Linda have two books, but we're featuring one of them specifically. And also I wanted to say that all three of them are writing in different genres, which I am excited to get into a little bit. And I think that's what makes this particularly interesting tonight. So Amy, let's start with you. Why did you write this book, Match?
Well, I had, as you said, a 35-year career in organ transplantation, and it's in my DNA. I'm passionate about it. I've been writing mysteries. The second one, Cut, is the first one. So they always say, write what you know. And there were some people I didn't like at work. So I decided after I retired that I would kill them in my mysteries. And since I've been in transplant, I actually know how to kill people and use their organs. So the first scene in this book really does take somebody out. It's not horrible. There's not too much blood, but that way then I can use their organs for transplantation. And I have a passion. So I think everybody in the world should just make a decision if they want to be an organ donor. And this is part of the vehicle. My book has been referred to as a mystery with a mission. So, and I write because it's really hard. It's something really hard to do. And I figure as I'm moving into my third chapter, that it's a good thing to keep me going. So those are just a few of the things. Those are the few of the reasons why I write. And it's cathartic to kill people you don't like, and it's legal.
Good to know. Good to know where your mind goes at night. Thank you, Amy, for kicking us off. And Linda, how about you? Why did you write A Richie Boy?
Well, Brooke, I'm glad to be here. A Richie Boy, my father was a Richie Boy. And let me just first say what a Richie Boy is. A Richie Boy was generally an immigrant who understood the language of the enemy and was recruited into the US Army during World War II. And so my father was from Vienna, and he was a Richie Boy. And was an inspiration for me to do this sort of novel and stories that I wrote. And I think really my curiosity motivated me really to better understand his particular journey, of leaving one homeland for another and joining the army and returning to the theater of war, a place where he, was trying to escape, and successfully then rooting himself in this country where I was born. So that was my motivation. I'm a former journalist, so I love research. And so historical fiction has been kind of my thing.
Thank you. That's great. And Layla, hello. Tell us why you wrote Strong Like Water.
So my book is a memoir. I'm the memoirist, and I like to say it has some surprising leadership insights. I really, the whole time I was writing, I was sort of between the two, but in the end, it really needed to come out as a memoir. And for me, it covers a period in my life where I experienced a lot of adversity. And as I was coming out of it, I realized I was having all these insights and these just really deep self-reflections. And I thought, I'm not going to remember all of this. And I just felt compelled. I don't know that one day I just made the decision. I just started writing, and I journaled for over a year. And then I just decided that I needed to put it down, because as I was starting to share some of my stories with friends, more often than not, they'd say, oh, I do that. Oh, I know what you mean by that. And I realized that even though the details were very personal to me in my life, the theme of being on a journey and self-reflecting and getting greater insight into who you are is one that we all go on. And I thought, if I can write my story and have it be a way to help others when they're on their path, then that seemed like a good way to go.
Thank you. What a great way to kick it off. And so as you all can hear from what they've shared, we have Linda is a historical fiction writer, and Amy is writing murder mysteries, and Layla has written a memoir. And so I love this. And I was kind of excited when this panel came together about the different genres, because I think it's really insightful for people who are listening and writing in different genres. And so Amy, I wanted to ask you about your unique kind of murder mystery. You introduced it a little bit, but you are doing advocacy, actually. I mean, you're bringing this expertise that you have in transplantation, and you're very funny. And so it can't escape the readers that there is humor and a lot of irony and tongue in cheek. So can you talk about the balance of writing a murder mystery, really intentionally bringing in humor, and what was the thing that you most leaned into, just in terms of balancing mission and humor and your very strong characters?
Well, I have, as I said before, a passion for organ transplantation, and people who've read book one, Cut, and now some new reviewers, what they've said is they felt like they got a peek behind the curtain, because they get a real peek into the real world of transplantation. I also feel comedy and humor. Well, for myself as a professional in transplant, I went to Second City for a year and took improv classes and graduated actually before I was recruited out to California. And I needed some levity because people do die and you need to ask them for their organs. And so that was kind of like my day job. And then getting to call someone and say, hi, we have a kidney for you. That was kind of some amazing, talk about balance. So people tell me I'm funny, but one of the characters in both books was inspired by my best friend, who I don't know, Melissa McCarthy. And my favorite movie is The Heat. So when I was thinking of Sarah Golden and Jackie Larson, they're two best friends from nursing school, and I have some nursing school friends who are a little wacky, and we still get together. I decided that I would use what's important to me: transplant, best friends, which I have still a friend from kindergarten, two of them I see, my nursing school friends, and my writing tribe. So I kind of put together the humor, because you do need humor, and I cast them. And the characters, and then I combine them, and I'm a visual writer, so I see it like it's a movie in my head. But I really want the reader to connect with the characters, have some empathy for them, think about the reality of all these people. 20 people die a day on a wait list, and that the people who get their transplants are just like, it's such joy, it's just such a gift. So that's what I kind of lean into and I'm from an Irish German family. So, you have to have a good sense of humor, or it's, you can't even get in. So I think some of it just seeps in. I don't typically try to be that funny, but my characters show up.
Exactly.
They're
Yeah.
outrageous.
Well, and you and Melissa McCarthy. So when the movie comes out, besties, I love it. Can't wait.
My girl.
So, Linda, in your story, you also are taking from personal experience, but in your case, it's your family. And you've written 2 books, and we're talking about Richie Boy, but maybe you can say something too about Tesa's song in terms of why you chose to fictionalize, also just the focus specifically on World War II. And so I just love to hear you talk about the connection to your family in these books, and just the decision about historical fiction.
Yeah. So I'm a first generation American. And so it's sort of my DNA, where I had this mom who grew up in Eastern Poland during World War II, and she actually escaped it. I would hear all these stories from her as a child. And similarly, while my dad wasn't as talkative about his background, I don't think sometimes men are, and he was in the Army. I knew he was in military intelligence, and that he escaped when he was a 15-year-old just before the war from Vienna. So I had this as part of my DNA. And as I got older, and so I started as a journalist, I've always been a writer. I wrote nonfiction. And as a young journalist, I actually interviewed my parents. I was sort of the family historian, and I really wanted to understand from where I came and, just sort of record this history because it was so unique. And what I learned of their story way back then, as I got older and they were older, and everything was more precious. And so I wanted to get the stories out because they were important stories for us to remember. I wasn't there, so it wasn't my story. That's why I really, and I didn't have the whole story. I didn't have the relationships. I didn't have all those fictional aspects of a human story, that I needed to have to tell it in the way I wanted to tell it. So it's invented and imagined, but the core of both of my books are true. And my Tasa song was based on my mother who survived Eastern Poland and lived underground for a year. Actually, she lived in the part of Poland that was taken over by the Russians the first 2 years of World War II. Richie Boy is inspired by my father. So there was just a lot of story there that had to be mined, and I did it. So
yeah, well, congratulations. Yes, and now you have a set, so it'll be interesting to see what comes next. And maybe we'll get to that in the Q&A. So Layla, you've written a memoir, and as Nick said in your opening, you're a chief people officer. So you've done that now for various companies. So that's like a very public facing position. I mean, in the sense that you're interacting with people, and what I was wondering, and when I was reading your book, was about putting yourself out there. I mean, putting your loss out there, putting your family out there, putting this trajectory of your life that's very intimate. And I'm particularly curious because I talk to authors a lot who are so scared about writing a memoir, especially if they have a fairly public persona. So I wondered if you could talk about that and what, were some of the, I don't want to focus on the negative, but I am curious about the reservations that you had, and then maybe like how you overcame that.
That's a great question. I think the reason why I felt I could write the memoir when I did is because the catalyst for it were the three people closest to me passing. And so since they were gone, I felt like I could write about them. And I had to, obviously you have to be careful. I do wonder sometimes if people whom I work with look at me and say, wow, that all happened to you, or worse, because my book really is all about the journey of how I learned to embrace all sides of me, my vulnerability, everything. And I'm not vulnerable 100% of the time. I mean, this last year has been really tough. And I do have moments where I think in my less than perfect moments, is someone going to say, well, hey, I thought you were, fully woke. What's going on here? You're not that person. So I definitely do have those moments. But I think in the end, my journey, I had to write this book as part of my continuous sort of self-discovery and actually embracing all those sides of me. And what is more vulnerable than actually just putting it all out there, the good, bad, and the ugly, and in a way not being able to take it back. So maybe I didn't think about it too deeply, but I think it becomes I just think it becomes an ongoing practice for me, which is, what I've signed up to do in this life. So
that's great. I mean, there is clearly a lot of synergy, with all of you, of course. I mean, we bring our lives to the page, of course, right? So this does segue into the next question, which is just, we talked about why did you write this book? And I thought that was an important intro to get people understanding what you're writing about. But I'd like to ask, the next question is a little broader, I guess. And I think we can just continue to go in order just because it helps in the Zoom room. So Amy, why do you write and what brings you to the page?
Well, I have a very active imagination. And so I honestly see things in so many ways. You could just kill somebody. it's not illegal to write about it, right? So also, I wasn't a writer. As you know, Brooke was my first writing coach when I did a self-pub memoir, and I knew nothing. And the truth is, even though I went to a Catholic school, I'm not a good speller. So I had this thing in my head, like, you can't be a writer because you're not a good speller. Well, now we have spell check, right? And grammar. However, one of the reasons I write is because when I show up and sit down and write, all of a sudden the characters start coming out in a way that I didn't plan for them to come. And that moment of magic, which I'm guessing my colleagues here and you, Brooke, have seen, go places that I didn't write in a scaffolding, or I didn't plan. So there's a bit of like showing up and writing and magic that happens. And then Jackie Larson's on the back of a motorcycle with Biker Bob, who I didn't even know of. And I wouldn't have gotten on the back of his bike, and he was drunk. And they were both drunk. But it's like this, you just show up and the magic happens, like Elizabeth Gilbert says. It does happen. So part of it is that I created characters that I kind of like to hang out with. I like to use, I think we all have an imagination, and sometimes it may have been stifled, but I think we all have it. So it's like a muscle. And I like to show up and try to flex that muscle and see what shows up. And some of it I like, some of it it's like, are you kidding me? And then I have to step aside because, as we know, the characters will tell you in fiction what it is they want to do. And I couldn't escape. I tried not to write transplant. And I remember hearing Michael Conley at Book Passage one time, and he had a book about a heart, there was a heart transplant patient. And I said, oh, great. I was like so on. I go, I work in transplant. I really don't want to write that. He goes, yeah, that's too bad. And I was just like, oh, okay. So it's like using what I have,
Right.
creating, and then I'm in a tribe with 3 other writers, as you know, who are all She Writes Press authors. And we support each other through the roller coaster ride of self-doubt and what are you thinking? And then the highs, like today, where we get to be together and celebrate what we've been working on for years. So I'm glad that I decided to have the courage to step on the train. And I'm glad, Brooke, that you were holding your hand out and invited me and helped shepherd me into the sisterhood, because it's amazing. And I'm forever grateful for you and for Book Passage, where I took a lot of mystery writing classes. So.
Oh yeah, I know that. That's awesome. Thank you, Amy. And yeah, my honor. Well, so Linda, tell us what brings you to the page? Why do you write?
Well, I am a learner. I guess this is the best way to describe me. I love learning about things, and I'm highly curious. So I think that's what brought me and love telling stories. So that took me to journalism. And years later, really about a dozen years ago, a good friend who is both a nonfiction and a fiction writer, and a professor at the university in the city I live in, Ohio State, he had suggested that I take his fiction workshop. He said that my nonfiction would improve my nonfiction. And so I did that, and it was amazing to inhabit characters. I found it intriguing. I learned more about people in doing it. And historical fiction worked and fit really well. I wanted to tell this story of my parents, and I wanted it to be a human story. And I realized a human story had to be told in fiction, to inhabit these characters like that. And make them real people. And I didn't know them as, young people, which is really the stage of their life that I was writing about. So yeah, I think it was just really curiosity, my learner, my just loving research, and liking to inhabit characters on a page.
It's interesting too. It's making me think that, that you're in relationship with a younger version of your parents too, which is
Yeah.
a
It
really
was
fascinating experience.
It was an experience. It was a wonderful experience, actually, just to be able to inhabit who I thought they had been and
Right.
experience a life that I had no idea, as a young person, that this is what they went through. And while it wasn't exactly what they went through, it certainly was similar to what they had to have gone through. So yeah, and I think writing also is like processing things. So for me, when I write, I can kind of process a lot, and that's for me personally. I really love to do that, and I can think that way better that way.
Thank you, Linda. It's really interesting. And Layla, so they've spoken a bit about inhabiting characters, and when you're writing memoir, you're inhabiting yourself. So tell us what brings you to the page.
I can really resonate with both Amy and Linda. I'm a learner, and I process through writing, and I think I write to make sense of the world, to make sense of who I am and the beliefs that I hold, and why some things are easy for me and others really hard, and it's not the same for. I've just always been a student of the human condition, and as I started to write, I think just the very act of writing helps you to really continue to go deeper and deeper into understanding who you are. There were so many moments where I would write a scene and then I would try to imagine what the reader was hearing, or I would be working with my writing coach and she's like, well, that doesn't make sense. I'm like, well, what do you mean? In my head, it made complete sense. And you realize like, oh, wait, when I had to write it down for somebody else to read it, I realized, oh, I've skipped a few steps there. So just the very act again of trying to write my story continued to reveal the layers that had to be peeled back. And I find that interesting.
Yeah, well, that's great. I mean, and you kind of have to, because it's a long slog, as you guys know.
Yes.
It's like it's exciting, but you have to really stay with it. So, and congratulations to all of you. I want to pause here to do the reading, because then I have some publishing questions. So we're going to kind of switch gears after that. So each of these authors has picked a short selection so that we can hear them read their own work. And we'll just continue in our order because it's nice and I like routine. So Amy, will you kick us off with an excerpt from Match?
I would be delighted. Match, Chapter 1. Tightly squeezing Kayla's nostrils closed, the hooded figure poured the last of the second glass of opioid-laced milk down her throat and threw the cup across the floor of the abandoned basement. Kayla slumped forward, hands tied behind the chair of her body colliding with the cement floor. Blood oozed from her head. Ignoring the non-stop buzzing of her cell phone, the assailant shuffled up the basement stairs and outside. Driving far away from the scene, Kayla's captor ripped off latex gloves and tossed them out the window. Sarah Golden slammed her fist down on her desk. This was the 10th time she had left a message for Kayla in the past hour. She checked the time, 10:30 p.m. Another exciting night for me, she muttered. It was far too late to be at her office on a weekend, but it was the only time she could get her desk work done at the transplant center without countless interruptions and meetings. She shut down her computer and left her office in an angry huff. When she got home, Sarah poured herself a glass of Merlot and soaked in her bathtub. Well, at least I have Sunday dinner with Jackie and Laura to look forward to, she thought. Early Sunday night, Sarah was heading out of her San Francisco apartment when her cell phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and saw that it was her boss, Dr. Bauer of the San Francisco Global Organ Transplant Institute. Hi, Dr. Bauer, what's up? Hi, Sarah. I just received a disturbing call from Dr. Santos at the Miami International Transplant Institute about Kayla, our living donor coordinator. Dr. Bauer seemed to be struggling to get the words out. Sarah rarely heard him sound so shaken. Well, what happened? I know she was checking on her grandmother in Miami. She's been ill for a long time. Dr. Bauer continued. She was brought into the Miami ER yesterday with an opioid overdose and was declared brain dead. Santos just transplanted her liver and both of her kidneys into recipients. Sarah's knees buckled under her and she collapsed onto the couch in her living room. Oh my God, I can't believe this. I knew we were getting more organs from the opioid crisis, but I never thought it would be from one of our own. Dr. Santos told me the local police are investigating the case as a possible homicide and will contact us as soon as they know anything more. I never pegged Kayla as someone who'd be into drugs, did you? Dr. Bauer asked. Not in a million years. It doesn't mix with how I experienced her, but I only knew her over the last year. Sarah also couldn't help remembering that when she had met Kayla a year earlier, Kayla had made it clear that she thought of Sarah as just another manager who'd quit in a couple years and that it would be best if Sarah just left her alone to do her job. And she wasn't all that charming about it either.
Thank you, Amy. So I love it. As you said, you just get right into the action. So it's fabulous. All right, let's hear from Linda.
Okay. I'm reading from a story called The Interrogation. January of 1945. Beyond the prisoner facing him, Eli Stoff saw daylight dimming through the room's single window. Across the table, the young soldier remained silent, staring at his hands, which he clasped tightly on the cold aluminum. A lighter, a broken cigarette, and a black and red enameled Hitler Youth membership badge lay to the side. Eli had had the boy empty his pockets before he began his interrogation. Now, several hours in, the January chill seeped through the plaster walls. It was time to get into Malcolm Schlick's head. Eli lowered his voice and leaned forward. So you had no choice but to sign on with Hitler's army. You did what you were told. I understand. Eli was trained to understand. He'd arrived in Paris in late December, part of a 6-man military intelligence team. His orders were simple: arrest all Nazis impersonating Allied officers, put them through rudimentary questioning, write up a report. But something about Malcolm Schlick made this case more complex. Eli couldn't put his finger on it. Schlick still wore the olive drab uniform he'd used to blend into the Paris streets, like so many of the beaten down Germans trying to evade capture. Last night, Eli had overheard traces of German in Schlick's otherwise fluid French as he bought a paper at the local newsstand. He noticed Schlick's uniform was scruffy, patched with dried mud, probably taken from a dead soldier. Curfew approached, so Eli quickly motioned his MI partner, Henry White, to act as backup before he approached the likely imposter. Now the boy, because he was just a boy at 17, sat in a sterile room in an abandoned villa in Le Visinay, red blotches flaring up on his neck. Eli couldn't help feeling sorry for Schlick, who he now knew hailed from a village near Salzburg, plucked from his family at 15 to face frontline combat. Whether he joined the German troops of his own volition or under duress was yet to be determined. Eli felt a slight tapping of the boy's foot against the wood floor. Can I get you a cup of tea or coffee? He asked him. Malcolm looked up, a sudden shiver twitching through his upper body. Ja, Kaffee, bitte. That familiar Austrian accented German, it matched up with Schlick's Salzburg narrative. Eli regarded the boy more closely. Malcolm was unskilled in mastering his facial expressions, lacking that mask donned by the men Eli had faced over the past weeks, a mask he would get them eventually to drop. Malcolm seemed unpracticed, too, in arranging his body to hide distress. Fear, not anger, shone through the young Austrian's eyes, pressing on his brow, circling his mouth. Vulnerability spoke in the slack of his shoulders. Eli had been trained to notice these signs as he interrogated suspects and prisoners. He worked to make them feel safe so he could learn more about Nazi plans or troop movements, anything to better inform Allied forces as they edged toward victory in an insufferable war. That's how he found himself stationed in a town west of Paris, face to face with a member of the Hitler Youth, just 4 years his junior.
Thank you, Linda. just part of the dramatic story there of the Ritchie boys. That's great. Thank you. All right, Layla.
Okay.
Strong like water.
Strong like water. I told myself once again that Daniel was no longer my problem. I had alerted his family about my concern. What more could I do? Sunday, Nadia and I went to a birthday party for the 2-year-old daughter of a close friend at work. Walking with a juice box in one hand and a small paper plate with a slice of birthday cake in the other, I ushered Nadia to the kids' table and placed the treats in front of her. I rejoined a group of parents a few feet away who were trying to have a conversation in between tending to their sugar-infused hopped-up toddlers. "How's Daniel?" one friend asked, and then another, and another still. I struggled to find the right level of response for the question I had been obsessing over all week. I wanted to say, "I have no idea, and I'm sick with worry as I haven't heard from him in almost a week." But I kept it light, as was my style, more as a way to keep lying to myself that everything was all right than anything else. Having to answer questions about Daniel's whereabouts as I sat amongst intact families heightened my anxiety to the point where all I could hear was the beating of my heart in my ears, with muffled voices distant and garbled in the background. I didn't know what to think or do anymore. Daniel had left us, so there was a part of me that was trying to emotionally disconnect from him and get used to the idea that we were heading towards a divorce. At the same time, our separation had come on so suddenly, and it was so new, so fresh, that my feelings for him were all tangled up inside. I was torn between trying to push him out of my consciousness so I could start moving on with my life, and feeling like I needed to take care of him in the way I had been doing since first meeting him 9 years earlier. Eventually, I grabbed Nadia and left the party, starting the long drive from Menlo Park up to the city. I called Marcy and told her I had to drop Nadia off. As I rounded the bend to get off the freeway on Felt Street, I began to cry. My body and my heart knew long before my head that something was seriously wrong. I could no longer ignore the sirens going off in my body. I was desperate to reach Daniel, to hear his voice, just to know he was all right. I didn't care if we were together. I just wanted to know he was safe. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw Nadia staring out the window in a trance, half asleep. Looking back, this was the moment my strong will and my denial were finally toppled over by what my heart and body knew. It was like a street fight, and my heart and body had finally gathered enough energy to stop the bully that was my head-based iron steel will. I was trying to protect myself by not allowing myself to feel. What I didn't know was that if you don't feel the pain, you can't be grateful for the love and goodness in your life. You cut off the lows, but you cut off the highs too, and all the nuances in between. As if I was on autopilot, my mind no longer in control, I drove Nadia directly home so that Marcy could get her ready for bed. Marcy met me in the driveway to take Nadia upstairs. No words passed between us as our eyes met, and she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Don't worry about a thing here. I'll make the bug a bubble bath and her favorite mac and cheese for dinner." Nadia laid her head on Marcy's shoulder, her blonde locks intermingling with Marcy's black hair, and I was reminded of how grateful I was to have Aunt Marcy in my life. I turned my car back to the closest police station, which happened to be in the Western Addition, one of the last few parts of town where there were projects and low-income housing. The short drive from my home to this part of town was like a metaphor for my shiny, perfect life colliding with the grittier truth screaming to emerge. There it was on display right before my eyes. The universe was yelling at me to wake up. Getting out of my car, I took in the crisp December air, but felt dizzy just the same. Is this really happening? What was I doing? I wanted to turn around and pretend everything was okay, but my feet continued to make their way to the concrete, square building painted in seafoam green in front of me. I swung open the heavy door and stood inside a largely empty, dingy, open space that felt like something in between an old public library and the Department of Motor Vehicles. There were corkboards covered with public interest posters, and in the middle of the room was a counter that had bars and plastic separating me from the officer sitting behind it. I approached and waited for him to look up at me. I didn't know where to start. I stuttered, I haven't heard from my husband in close to a week. I think there's something wrong.
Thank you, Layla. All right. Well, it's fascinating to hear the different styles and different voices, which is also what's so exciting about being a reader and, in my case, a publisher of different women's voices. And I wanted to ask a publishing question because that's part of what we're talking about tonight as well. An hour is clearly not enough time to get to all the things. I prepared like double as many questions, and there are questions coming in as well. But let me ask about, I think the journey to publication is so different for everyone, and it's a story all its own. So I think I'd like to just ask a little bit more of a specific question, which is, what has been the highlight of your publishing journey? And I also want to acknowledge that Amy and Layla's pub date was officially yesterday. And Amy, as I said earlier, is writing a series. And so this is the second of however many, but the third one is already signed and in the process of being written, I think. And Linda has 2 books out, and I'm sure more to come. So actually maybe an open-ended question of what you would share with, the audience, I think, is largely writers, and probably a lot of readers as well. So what would you want to share about your publishing journey? And let's start with Amy.
Well, the most exciting is when you get your ARCs, which I didn't know what an ARC was. It's an advanced reader copy, and it's actually a book. And my friend Betsy, my writing sister friend, is that we're inviting people in our imagination to spend 6, 8, 10 hours in a story that we made up, or in case the memoir, it's your life. But that's like a big ask. So the exciting part is actually having done all the work and all that it takes to have an advanced reader copy. And then it's real, like there's this book. So to me, getting the ARCs, the advanced reader copies, which for people who don't know, go out to reviewers and people who will, give you blurbs for the book or whatever. That's kind of big time exciting, I think. So that was just one of the highs after all the work that goes into culminating into that. It's a whopper. So that would be a highlight for me.
That's great. Thank you. How about you, Linda? What would you want to share? It doesn't have to be a high, just something. And you own a bookstore. I think that's also important to say. And so you're very deeply in the industry from the side of being an author, a bookstore owner and seller and a reader. So what do you think now about what people need to know about the publishing journey?
Well, I think that, I'm a learner. I mentioned that before. And so I loved learning about the whole process. And that was what was so exciting to me, to see a book, from being an idea and a manuscript and watching it become, copy edited and typeset and developing a cover. Oh, that was probably the most exciting part, was just developing a cover for the book and seeing that visual image of the book. So every element of the process was really fascinating to me. I'm an entrepreneur, and so I loved the work with the press, with She Writes Press, and being part of the process. It was wonderful. So that was great. And after the fact, and my book came out last September, so I've been around on, it's not pub date now, but I really enjoy connecting with audiences in whatever way I can. Sometimes things I didn't really consciously even, they weren't conscious. It comes out in the conversations in book club groups or, bookstore events where there's questions and insightful questions. I think that's, when they connect with what you've written, there's something very special about that too.
Yeah, I agree. I'll be looking forward to doing these. Well, I think in the future we'll probably do Zoom plus in person, and that will be, I think we'll be seeing more streaming into events so that people can come from all over the world. Layla, how about you? What would you say about the publishing journey?
Yeah. Well, getting the ARCs is super exciting, and reading a review or hearing someone would take something away from your book that really shows that they really got what you were saying. That is amazing. I did not expect to find such a rich community of other authors and writers. I mean, that has been such a surprise and so lovely, because I didn't know anything about the industry and about the process. Um, and after, the initial anxiety, it never really goes away. It's always kind of a low grade anxiety because everything is so new. But you just realize that everybody's doing the same thing, and they're all in different parts of the journey. And I'm surprised by how much support, generous support, the other writers give, because writing is solitary, right? You spend all your time, and you could feel a little isolated. And then when it comes time to publish, then all of a sudden you have to be an extrovert again. And so it's a little bit of like, oh, hold on a minute, I just spent all this time by myself, and now and so having a community and others to connect with and support you has just been really surprising and really wonderful.
Oh, that's great to hear. And do you think for you, has that been the She Writes community, or has it just been more broadly? I mean, have you felt yourself leaning into a broader community of writers as well?
It's primarily the She Writes community. I mean, I still have a full-time job, so I can't dip into as much events as I'd like to, but even just, I wasn't even on social media before 6 months ago. I didn't know how to do Instagram. Even the people that I'm meeting on social media, the writers, the She Writes community, the original writing groups that I started my writing journey with, all of them have shown up and have shown tremendous support.
Yeah, it's so great. I agree with you that there really is not a more supportive group in the world than fellow writers. You admit, like,
We
this is what I'm
understand the
doing.
agony.
Yes, they understand exactly, and very generous group of people as well.
Yes.
So I encourage questions to come. There's a couple sprinkling in, so I think I'm going to share some of those and then also pepper it with my own questions that I still have here. But someone is asking you, Amy, what is the Klein sommelier recommendation to accompany match?
Oh, that's funny. Well, Cut ends up at a winery. I'm not telling you anything else. So I have a nice wine connoisseur, and my husband worked there. So I did give him a shout out. He's an architect, Mark Schatz, and hasn't been killed yet in the book, but he is on David.
He's too beloved to be killed, I think.
Great guy, but you got to keep him on a leash. So, so the wine, I'm going to go with, oh, my kids are going to kill me. I like Zinfandel. They're so tired of me, but I'm going to go with a really good Zinfandel, like Zakiki. That'd be something you might want to sip and enjoy.
It has to be a deep, deep red.
Yeah,
from all of these books for sure.
Absolutely.
So here's a question from Amy, who's a fellow She Writes author, and she asks, after having completed this type of publishing process, is there anything you would do differently the next time? And that's interesting because, as we said, Linda and Amy have 2 books under their belts now, and would be curious to hear from Layla, of course, too. So something you would do different, and is there anything that you felt was particularly pivotal to your success? Maybe each of you could take one or the other. So Linda, what would you do different? Or is there something specific that you would be like, oh yeah, that was successful and I would do it again?
Well, I think, in terms of the outcome, I think that marketing is extremely important. And I think it's very important to be very focused in one's marketing, and not try to do all kinds of things, but rather do the things that make sense for you to reach the audience that your book would reach. And so I did a few things because both books were in a similar genre and had a similar audience. So I learned from my first book, and I got even better in terms of what I was doing and who I was reaching in the second book. So I feel like I feel pretty good about how I reached out. I think timing sometimes is there's certain things that you can't control. And my book came out in September, right in the middle of the COVID situation, when a lot of books that were supposed to be published in spring of 2020, publishers had moved them into the fall. And so the competition for getting reviews was fierce. That's something you can't control.
Right. You never know. And I do want to say, especially because of the fiction, I mean, Linda and Amy both are writing novels. You both have great websites, and I do want to encourage people to look at them, because sometimes fiction is not easy to get specific and positioning your work, and I think you've both done a great job in terms of, if there are others out there who are writing genre fiction like Amy or historical fiction like Linda, to look at those sites as models, because there's a lot of good information. And it just makes me think, Amy, I mean, kind of coming back to your advocacy and the fact that there's a series, have you learned something about writing that you're implementing, as a whole in your series, or marketing for that matter?
Well, I actually, as you know, on my website, I do have a button for people to sign up to donate. And honestly, with
Organs, not money.
Organs. If they want to send me another check, I'm okay with that too. I mean, why not? But what made my day too is when people read the book Cut and that they signed up to be organ donors. And there's a link on my website for that. And in the series, because the first one is, can you buy your, Cuts, can you buy your way to the top of a liver transplant list? Which surprised me, that because I'm in the industry, people have the question. I went with that. But I have a lot of good information on my website about organ and tissue donation and awareness, because at the end of the day, God forbid, you will be asked, or a family member would be asked. So I weave that into my story and my transplant, but I back it up. And just to your point on the website, Brooke, I went to a platform thing way before Cut was out that you put on with somebody that's dragging me by my hair. I'm like, I don't need a platform. My book's not even out yet. What, are you crazy? And she's like, you might want to come. And it was like, thank goodness I went, because there are a lot of moving parts, to your point, Linda. And we have the website and the marketing and and you think you could just make up a story, write it down, and everybody's going to show up and buy your book. That's the dream. And there's, as you know, Brooke, you're all, what is it? Greenlight your book and a platform and things that really are good. And the She Writes Sisters are amazing, because as much fear as comes, at least for me and others, you can go and say, oh, did you do this? Did you try that? Did you? And everyone, like you mentioned, Layla, is so generous. Like, don't do that. Don't spend your money on that one. Or try this one. And it's so nice to be in a group that's not competitive, but supportive. So I do flow with transplant best friends, organ transplant, and the theme of the 3 books. Who knows what will happen after the third one, but I think you mature over time, and the gremlins and the self-doubts, we have a place to go to say, what was I thinking? I felt uplifted both by my writing tribe, which, Linda Joy Myers and Christy Nelson and Betsy Graziani Fossbender, having that be part of the core of support and attending events like this. And She Writes Press. They have your back. I mean, I know you're hurt, but you do have our back.
I do. We do. Absolutely. Always. Thanks for that, Amy. And Layla, your book is just out and it's your debut, but I mean, you've learned something already along the way, I know. So it sort of makes me curious what Amy said, does it feel, I mean, now it's out, does it feel easier? Like, are you sighing, being like, okay, what's done is done? Or is it more like a, oh shit moment?
Yeah, well, it's like, wait, I'm not done now. Like I have to keep posting and I have to keep, so the reality
It's just beginning.
It's just the beginning. Exactly. No, I agree with everything that both Linda and Amy have said 100%. And well before my book came out, someone said something about platform, like, oh, I can't, I have no headspace for that, but you have to do it. That's the way it's done. So I don't know that I could have done it any differently, because it is such a large amount of information if you don't come from this world. And I kept on looking for somebody to explain it to me, like strategically from the top down. And there's no one way of doing it. I wasn't going to get it. And I remember somebody said to me very early on, you know that saying, she can't see the forest from the trees? She goes, well, you only see the forest. You need to drop down and look at the trees. And I swear, and because I'm like, no, just explain the whole thing to me. And that's not been my experience, right? Because the books are different, the industries are different, the writers are different. So I just think everyone's got a different way of learning all the different pieces, and they're going to resonate with you. Some are going to lean into some things more than others, which is why it's so important to have a good partner. I don't know what I would have done without. Brooke has, when you sign on with She Writes, they have a 250-page manual, which obviously I did not read all the way through, but whenever something came up, I'd go to the glossary and I'd be like, okay, now I need to learn about how do I make an audiobook. And you're always sort of one step ahead of the student, right? The teacher and the student.
Yeah, well, thank you all. I appreciate that. And this is what's wonderful about She Writes, is our community and our authors are so savvy and amazing writers and amazing books. And so we're almost done here, but I thought it would be kind of fun to do a little bit of like a speed round on this last question, because Jackie asks the tried and true question, I think, of anyone who is looking at you all and being like, they did it. How did they do it? So what would be a short offering that you would give to others for self-discipline in your writing habits? What's one thing that you do in your process, or daily or weekly, that you feel like this works? Amy?
Schedule writing time, block it out, tell somebody you're doing it so you're accountable, and then turn your phone off and show up. And if you have a deadline with She Writes Press, you better make the deadline.
Excellent advice. How about you, Linda?
Turn everything off. Amy's absolutely right. If you cannot focus when you're writing, you cannot write. So, you cannot have distractions. So whatever you need to do to get rid of those distractions during whatever time you have, and I don't always have time every day. I know they say, oh, write every day. I'm a bookseller. I'm doing a lot of things, like I know we're all kind of doing other things. So you make those schedules to write. And when you do, don't allow yourself to be distracted.
That's right. I would agree. And then the last thing is, I found that for me, writing first thing in the morning, and I've talked to a lot of writers, seems to be the best time, because I get into my left brain and my thinking brain, and that is not a good place to be fresh and to be a vessel for the ideas to come to you. So for me, I ended up writing, and I'm not a morning person, so it wasn't because I liked it. I just ended up writing first thing in the morning for however many hours I could do. And then, you have it done for the day or however often. So I think that's an important one too. I don't know many people that can write well late in the evening.
There's a handful of night owls, from time I've met them, but that's good advice. Or maybe the advice is just to find that sweet spot for you, that
whatever
really,
that is,
whatever that is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I think you were right. Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for sharing your experiences and your writing advice, and especially your excerpts from your beautiful books. And please, everyone, these COVID times are crazy. And one of the things we're so lucky to have Book Passage. Linda, you're out there in the East Coast, but for us who are local here, I guess I want to say, you know, it's amazing that you can come in and drop in on Book Passage in
Yeah.
these times, you know, so there is that. But I know those of us who live local can't wait to get back and be there in the store in person and do giant events, because I miss that. And Book Passage has just been so supportive and doing such amazing things. So please buy a book. That is my request. Buy one of these authors' books, buy all 3 of them, but do continue to support your indie bookstore. Please don't buy on Amazon. Buy indie. It's worth it. The other day I bought a book, and I bought it at the same time as a friend, and she got hers the next day, and I was waiting my 4 or 5 days for it to arrive, but I was in my heart like, this is the right thing to do. And when it arrived, I was like, you know what? It wasn't that long. I have it, and I don't know that I would have read it sooner. So it's worth the wait. And we're very grateful to Book Passage, and very grateful to all of you for being with us tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. This was fun.
Very fun.
Thank you again, everybody, for coming in. Brooke, thank you so much. Very well said. Thank you very much for going. The books are a number of different books, and pinned to the very, very top of the live chat, there's a little blue bar up there. If you click that, there's a drop-down menu. It brings you to a wonderful bay of books by which you can go through and click through everybody. The thing, Strong Like Water and Richie Boys and Cut or Match, all available there tonight, as well as everything from She Writes Press available. I imagine you can go to shewritespress.com or buy them through our bookstore as well. Thank you, everybody, for supporting independent bookstores. Be sure to go check out Linda's bookstore too, if you have the time.
Gramercy Books.
You know,
yes,
Gramercy
exactly.
Books, if
Check
you're in
it
the
out.
area. If you'd like to purchase from bookpassage.com, we are open every single day of the week in Corte Madera, and every day of the week except for Mondays in San Francisco, because we hate Mondays in San Francisco. If you would like to purchase a book from our website, you can pick it up at our store if you happen to be there. But if you are not even in California and elsewhere throughout the United States, we'll ship it right to your house. Just purchase from us. You get some service over the phone if you'd like to call us up and ask about it. We're nice. We love talking to people on the phone. It's very, very pleasant. One last time, thank you for showing up. Please, if you're watching on YouTube right now, I don't know where else you'd be watching this, but if you're watching this live, please consider subscribing by clicking the sub button just underneath the thing, and click the bell if you want to be notified every time we go live. Thank you one last time, everybody. I hope you had a great time, and we will see you again very, very soon. Bye.